accept. And I think what we have to say is discrimination is wrong, full stop. However, sometimes guys misbehave in bars. How do we deal with that?
And also,
Well, hang on. Let's find out how we deal with that, because Mike Angove, he is on the line, and he's a former Thai kickboxing champion, a boxing commentator, and a bouncer.
Excellent.
So Mike is the man to ask these questions. How are you doing, Mike?
Yeah, good afternoon. It's certainly an interesting one, but I wouldn't call it discrimination so much as discretion. It's a practice that does occur.
Why?
And we're not talking about two blokes coming in.
You're talking about a
more
stag
likely
party,
talking
eh?
about
A rugby team.
A large group of guys coming in, or a group of 10 or 15 men coming into a bar. It becomes very difficult to handle a large group that are connected if one or two of them decide to misbehave. So, that can be a very good reason for saying to, a particular group, sorry, you can't come in because your shoes are the wrong colour. But generally speaking, it's because you've got too many men in a large group that are connected that can become problems later on.
What about a large group, Mike? What about a large group of women who are misbehaving?
Chicks on a hen's night.
Would they be treated the same way?
Generally speaking, no. But if you had a large group of women who were built like Val Adams, highly likely. It comes down to the potential for disruption in an alcohol-induced environment, and you can go back to saying, "Hey, look, you should control what you give these guys to drink." But often that's after the fact. You're asking people to leave when they've had one or two too many, and that's when they do become difficult.
You're talking about. Sorry, go on.
You want to have the other aspect I think you want to have a look at, and that's just large individual groups. The other aspect is if you don't have a balance in a bar. If you have 10 women in a bar and 90 guys, for example.
Sounds like good odds.
That creates a difficult environment, probably more so for the women than for the guys. And my experience is if we've got that situation where we want more of a balance in a bar, we will say to a particular group, look, if you come in as a couple, that's fine, or if you come in as a mixed group or women, that's fine. If you're guys, you're going to have to wait a little bit longer. And I'll tell you why, because when you get down there, would you rather have a nice mixed group, or would you rather have 90% dudes? And provided you're honest, most people are actually comfortable with that.
Mike Angove, I appreciate you coming and talking to us about that, knowing what it's really like for a bouncer out there. Thank you so much for your time. Very quickly in the last few seconds, guys, Blenheim is looking at a wine fountain. Would you like that? Talking about being able to go out and have a drink.
It's a magnificent idea. I suspect it's not going to happen. I think health and safety
I think there might be a few
alone.
laws against
exactly
it.
Right.
Really?
How fun, though.
They do it in
Champagne
Spain. They do it in
fountain.
Italy, supposedly. Why not in Blenheim?
Maybe you could just start with fizzy water and add the mixes
Because,
yourself.
Tim, you're not in Spain anymore, brother.
All right. Hey, look, that is Chris Clark and Linda Hallinan joining us for the last day of the week on the panel at RNZ. Jim Mora is back with you on Monday. This is Tim Watkins signing off. Thanks very much for joining us this hour. Have a great weekend.
Tō te mai rai, hoa mai he kōrero, kei te haere, hei kaupapa, kei te karawhiua. Welcome to Checkpoint, everyone. Thank you for being with us tonight. Jacinda Ardern meets the Queen. Craig McCulloch was there. A banking royal commission in Australia finds it really is the Wild West, and seemingly the bigger they are, the harder they fall prey to bad habits. Mark Middleton will be able to stay in New Zealand, his home, for 56 years. Bail laws under review. New evidence of just how stretched New Zealand's mental health services really are. Rats and mice are breeding like rats and mice. And the Warriors must be winning, touch wood, because we're covering them on Checkpoint. All of that and much more coming up after the Pips and then the news with Katrina.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten aho. A mother has delivered an emotional victim impact statement to the man who murdered her daughter, saying she hopes he rots in hell. In the High Court in Christchurch today, Saini Marong was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Renee Duckmanton with a minimum non-parole period of 18 years. Ms Duckmanton's badly burnt body was found on Main Rakaya Road in May 2 years ago. She'd been strangled to death. Tracy Duckmanton told Marong he has devastated her family and no punishment will make up for what he did. Friends and family of the murdered woman cheered as Justice Manda passed sentence. Mark Middleton has been reprieved from deportation. The stepfather of Lower Hutt schoolgirl Carla Cardno, who was raped and murdered in 1989, faced being sent back to Britain where he was born, despite having lived in New Zealand for 56 years. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
Last week, Mr Middleton was arrested and held in jail on the grounds of being in the country unlawfully. Immigration officials said he was only issued with a 30-day visitor visa after returning from holiday in Fiji in 1986 and had not applied for citizenship then or at any time since. Mr Middleton says he got the good news this morning from the Associate Immigration Minister Chris Farfoy, who intervened in the case and overruled Immigration New Zealand. A spokesperson for Mr Farfoy says he'll be speaking with officials to ensure any possible lessons have been learned from the case. Atu i te whare pāri mata, ko Chris Bramwell aho.
A review has found government officials failed to do any background checks on the people behind a proposed waste-to-energy scheme that was to be given hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxpayer money. Funding for a feasibility study was frozen by the Regional Development Minister Shane Jones after RNZ alerted him to the fact the scheme's chief executive had been referred to the Serious Fraud Office. The head of the Provincial Development Unit, Nigel Bickle, says an internal review has found officials fell below the prudent standards of due diligence. He says the public rightly expects government agencies to run a robust process before awarding contracts, and in this case it didn't happen. The chief executive of AMP has resigned and unreservedly apologised to customers. The BBC's Hull Griffith explains why.
Australia's financial sector is one of the most profitable in the world, but a Royal Commission inquiry has exposed systematic failures and abuses. Earlier this week, the AMP was forced to admit it had lied to the industry regulator for a decade about its practice of charging customers for advice they never received. The chief exec, Craig Mellor, said he did not condone the behaviour, but accepted he had to go. The Australian government has announced new penalties for corporate misconduct, which will include fines of up to 10% of a company's turnover.
Howell Griffith in Sydney. A young man convicted of the manslaughter of 4 people in a car crash caused by street racing has escaped a prison term. 21-year-old Dylan Cossey was today sentenced in the High Court in Hamilton to 1 year of home detention, 400 hours of community work and loss of his licence for 7 years. Our Waikato reporter Andrew McRae was in court.
Justice Hinton says Cossey wasn't the main cause of the crash, that was the driver of the other car, but he played a part. She told him she accepted he was remorseful, but he'd expressed it in a strange manner. Justice Hinton says Cossey's behaviour to date suggests issues of self-entitlement, impulsivity and stupid and rash decision-making when it comes to driving. The mother of one victim told him he should look at the sentence as an opportunity to move forward in a positive direction. The aunt of another victim says the home detention sentence is a joke. In Hamilton, ko Andrew McRae.
A helicopter paramedic has described a car crash south of Thames last night as one of the worst he's attended. The police say it appears a stolen car crossed the centre line near Kopu Bridge and hit a car driven by a local couple, Ian James Fielder and Jocelyn Fielder, both in their 60s. Also killed was the driver of the stolen car, 20-year-old Hayden David Clark of Drury. His 54-year-old father was flown to Middlemore Hospital with serious injuries. Paramedic Ross Aiken was one of those called to the scene.
I'd describe the damage to both cars as catastrophic. It's obviously a very busy scene with ambulances, fire trucks and obviously the crashed cars themselves. They were extensively damaged. It was quite hard to tell quite what they were.
Ross Aitken of the Auckland Rescue Helicopter Trust. It's 5 minutes past 5. To sport now, and New Zealand Rugby has indicated it would look favourably on Hurricanes captain Brad Shields' request to be allowed to play Test rugby for England if needed during the June international window. Shields is heading to England club Wasps after the Super Rugby season and is eligible to play for England because his parents were born there. However, his New Zealand contract prevents him from playing for any other club, any other country until his Super Rugby contract ends. The Chief Executive of New Zealand Rugby, Steve Chew, says they received a dispensation request from Shields this morning.
There's no point not acknowledging that Brad's been a very, very good servant of the game for a long period of time, and if he had been picked for the All Blacks, we wouldn't have been having this conversation on picking. He would have committed to New Zealand for a lot longer, but he hasn't made that cut, and he's now taken a different direction, and he's asked for some dispensation. We'll give that some serious consideration.
Steve Chew. England coach Eddie Jones is reportedly interested in Shields playing against South Africa in June. Warriors prop Adam Blair says they'll need to take a whole new approach to their game plan if they're to have any chance against unbeaten NRL competition leaders, the Dragons, in Auckland tonight.
They're saying that they're the best full pack in the comp at the moment. So for us, it's a challenge for our middles. We weren't up to it last week. We have to bounce back pretty quick. Come out here with a lot of energy, and it's going to be the thing that we're going to need because if we don't turn up, they'll put a scoreline on us.
Adam Blair of the Warriors. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Country Life goes hunting for rabbits with the help of some ferrets. There's a mixtape from Headless Chicken, Chris Matthews. Our Something for the Weekend focuses on Nelson, where the country's best young paramedics are gathering. And because it's Adolf Hitler's birthday, we have a sonic tonic dedicated to dictators and the people who stand up to them.
And on Lately at 10, we feature Kiwi Rules. The famous and the infamous introduce us to a new New Zealand artist. We'll have an eye not only on music, but books, people and politics, keeping you up to date with the world at the other end of the day and bringing you breaking news as it happens. That's Lately with Karen Hay, on Nights with Brian Crump on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel and the Central High Country. Cloudy periods and diffuse showers, some heavy and thundery tomorrow afternoon from Waikato to Taranaki. For the remainder of the North Island, mostly fine, but the odd shower about Bay of Plenty, the Taradua district and Kapiti, westerly gales for Wairarapa and Hawke's Bay. For Nelson and Marlborough, mostly fine, a shower or two possible about the Sounds today and about the Kaikoura coast tomorrow evening. Canterbury, mostly fine with westerly gales about the high country. However, a few showers spreading north tomorrow, possibly heavy with thunderstorms about the coast. Bulletu Fiordland, showers some heavy, easing tomorrow evening. Otago and Southland, showers about Southland, spreading elsewhere this evening. Westerly gales in exposed places. The Chatham Islands, fine spells today and a few showers tomorrow. It's coming up to 8 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you, Katrina. I always come in when I get to the bottom of the North Island. I return to the studio.
Yeah, you do,
but
in a noisy fashion.
It takes me about a minute to get back in. So if you ever say the South Island fine, you're going to be on your own for about 45 seconds.
Should be during the promo.
Right,
That's when you should be coming in
thank
there,
you
John.
very much. Thank you, Katrina. I shall do that from now on. Thanks, everyone, for being with us. Coming up on the program tonight, this extraordinary banking inquiry in Australia. Mark Middleton can stay in New Zealand mental health and addiction services and how hard it is to access them, and a less puffed version of me. Once my middle-aged self has breathed in and out a bit. But first, for a self-confessed Republican, Jacinda Ardern has had quite a brush with royalty, having a private meeting with the Queen at Buckingham Palace in that magnificent Korowai. The Prime Minister was also asked to make a toast at a packed banquet in the Palace's picture gallery, marking the end of the first day of the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. The summit was opened by the Queen, who in an unprecedented move lobbied leaders on behalf of the Prince of Wales, her son of course, suggesting they one day choose Charles to succeed her as head of the Commonwealth. Our political reporter Craig McCulloch is in London.
May I invite you all to join me in a toast to the Commonwealth, towards a common future.
Jacinda Ardern raises a glass of water, her pregnancy not keeping her from being one of only 2 Commonwealth leaders asked to make a toast at a banquet at Buckingham Palace. The room was packed with dignitaries, heads of government and royalty. At the Prime Minister's table alone, her British counterpart Theresa May and the Duke of Cambridge, Prince William. Queen Elizabeth as host for what is widely regarded to be her last Heads of Government summit.
I know that all my family join me in wishing you a very enjoyable evening. Thank you.
Roughly 130 people, all in black tie attire, mix and mingle at the lavish dinner. Draped in a korowai or Māori cloak, Ms Ardern implores the guests to strive to improve lives through the Commonwealth.
In New Zealand, there is a Māori proverb, He aha te mea nui o te ao. What is the most important thing in the world? He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. It is the people, the people, the people.
It was not the only privilege bestowed on the Prime Minister today. Earlier, she had a private audience with the Queen, something granted to just 4 of the 19 new Commonwealth leaders.
I felt exceptionally lucky today to have an audience with the Queen. Not everyone has had that opportunity.
But when it comes to the detail of what was discussed, Ms Ardern plays coy, citing royal protocol.
I'm not going to go into the detail of the conversation. Needless to say, it was very warm and very focused on New Zealand.
One issue not raised was the death at the weekend of Willow, the last of the Queen's corgis. Ms Ardern had considered offering a sympathetic ear, but decided against it.
No, I didn't in the end, actually. The tone just didn't feel right.
Another sensitive topic, Jacinda Ardern is a self-confessed Republican, but she says that didn't make her first meeting with the Queen awkward at all, although her brush with royalty hasn't changed her views.
Having said that, I've always been very clear when asked about the issue of New Zealand becoming a republic. This is not on my agenda. It's not something I'll be pursuing as a leader. It's something that I think over time New Zealanders may consider, but I don't think it'll be anytime soon.
What about if the Queen dies?
Oh, it's a bit dark, isn't it?
At times, the summit does seem almost a farewell tour. The Queen turns 92 on Saturday and has been winding down her duties. She's been head of the Commonwealth since coming to the throne in 1952, but the position is not automatically held by the British monarch. At the formal opening, she took the unusual step of appealing to the Commonwealth nations to choose her son, Prince Charles, to succeed her as their head. The Prince of Wales himself also addressed the audience.
For my part, the Commonwealth has been a fundamental feature of my life for as long as I can remember, beginning with my first visit to Malta when I was just 5 years old.
On this, Ms Ardern is in line with the Queen. She wants to see the position shift to Prince Charles rather than any other nation's leader.
Look, I've seen the debate over just who gets to host the next Commonwealth. I think it would be much smoother, much more continuity, simply to have the head of the Commonwealth to follow the crown.
The leaders will make their call tomorrow as they head into a private retreat at Windsor Castle. From London for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
Let's cross the Tasman now, where a banking royal commission has claimed its first high-profile scalp. It's an unprecedented inquiry, this one, a knock-em-down, hang-em-high revelatory embarrassment for Australia's banking sector, especially that country's biggest banks. Opposed at first by many in the banking business and political establishment, it's now providing a compelling insight into behaviour so unethical that the chief executive of AMP, Craig Miller, today stepped down over revelations of board-level deception, or lying in plain English, and misappropriation of funds. Earlier this week, a nurse gave tearful testimony about losing her home after taking advice from Westpac, while lawyers presented evidence that the Commonwealth Bank of Australia knowingly charged dead clients fees for years. Now, Madeline Matera is a partner and national head of financial services at Grant Thornton in Australia. While she obviously works in the financial sector, she does not have clients before the Commission. I spoke to her earlier this afternoon.
There's certainly quite a number of areas where the conduct has been around how the big four banks can maximise their revenue streams, and very little regard to the consumer or the customer, whichever term you wish to use. And I think there's a lot of consideration that really needs to be given at the big end of town around how incentives and remuneration actually drive behaviour and drive the sort of outcomes that we've been hearing about in the media.
Yeah, a quote from The Guardian, we've heard evidence of appalling behaviour by Australia's major banks, including alleged bribery, forged documents, repeated failure to verify customers' living expenses before lending them money, and mis-selling insurance to people who can't afford it. Some of this is opportunism, in other words, people who are incentivised on commission trying to earn more money. Some of it kind of reeks of pre-GFC recklessness.
I think the driver, as far as I can see, is really about two things. It's about culture and governance. And culture and governance actually allow the remuneration and incentive structures that we see that drive bad behaviour, but also it's the culture and governance that make it very hard to detect and forestall the sort of practices that we've seen. And it also makes it very difficult for anybody who speaks up to get heard.
Yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it? It wasn't a culture of whistleblowing. And as the extent of it emerges, you have the Treasurer, Scott Morrison, warning wrongdoers could face jail. That's how serious these things are, he's saying. This is extraordinary.
It very much is, and personally I don't think that the current legislation actually allows the jailing of banking executives, but I think that's he's certainly raised the stakes somewhat, and it remains to be seen how this plays out. But I think what ScoMo is articulating is the horror at how widespread a number of the conduct failings that we've heard have been, and it's not just one organisation. I think there's I did hear some talk today about that whilst Commonwealth Bank actually had the gold medal in terms of egregious behaviour uncovered by the Royal Commission, AMP got the silver medal, and that's not great when we're talking Olympic-style proportions of conduct failures within the major banks. But I will point out that it's very interesting to see that this is happening in the major banks. And I deal with a lot of small and mid-sized financial institutions such as credit unions and mutual banks. And I have to say that the organisations that I work with are really looking on developments in the Royal Commission with some degree of horror to see what actually goes on in the big four banks that actually are supposedly the trusted brand names in Australian society.
And it really does seem to be the big four. I mean, you mentioned AMP, obviously, but the people who are looking baddest of all, for want of a better description, and I apologise for that appalling English, are the big players.
That's true, and I think this is an output of the phenomenon of vertically integrated financial institutions, which is a slightly euphemistic way of saying banks who own life insurance companies, general insurance companies, financial planning arms, and funds management arms. And hence are looking for a maximum share of the of wallet from their customer.
And they can get away with almost anything because everything is in-house.
Look, that is true, and the concept of conflicts of interest is really getting an airing in the Royal Commission, and that's certainly something that is a real issue in these the diversified financial institutions with that feature of vertical integration that I mentioned earlier. Because if you as an average consumer walk into a Big Four bank's financial planning arm, you actually stand a fairly sizable chance of being sold only products that are manufactured by that bank or a related entity of that bank, and not necessarily having the opportunity even to consider or invest in something that may be offered by one of their competitors, for example.
Yeah.
And I don't know that the average consumer really actually understands the potential for conflicts of interest and how that might actually impact their interests.
Madeline, as all of this comes out, and it's starting now to disappear from the business pages and end up on the front pages, can you describe the procedure itself? It's obviously unprecedented, this commission, this inquiry. What is it like? It must be absolutely compelling as it unfolds.
Indeed it is, and myself and a number of my colleagues and a number of individuals I deal with in client organisations are watching it on their laptops a lot through live streaming during their working day. It is there was some commentary that it was actually better than reality television. Possibly that view is not shared by the witnesses appearing in front of the Royal Commission, but it is very much almost a US-style televised courtroom, which is quite unprecedented in Australia. And the nature of a Royal Commission into a particular industry, being banking, superannuation and financial services, is, as I understand it, somewhat unprecedented in the Western world. So we are very much breaking new ground in Australia, but the nature of the proceedings is well worth looking at because it is very much an adversarial style courtroom procedure, and the Commissioner and Senior Counsel Rowena Orr are doing a stellar job of airing the misconduct issues.
Madeline Matera, who was a partner with Grant Thornton in Sydney, obviously watching with eyes wide open. This is extraordinary. New Zealand's biggest four banks all have Australian parents, of course. There are different banking laws and regulations in New Zealand, but in future programs of Checkpoint, we'll look at some of the most common practices being identified by the Royal Commission and ask, are they happening here? That to come on Checkpoint. It's 21 minutes past 5, or almost on Friday night. Thank you for being with us. Friends and family of Christchurch woman Renee Duckmanton cheered and jeered as the man found guilty of murder was locked away today for at least 18 years. Gambian-born butcher Sane Morong was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of the sex worker at the High Court in Christchurch. But Ms Duckmanton's family want to know why the 33-year-old was still in New Zealand when he killed her in 2016. Logan Church was in court.
Only moments after Sane Morong was handed a life sentence in prison, with a minimum non-parole period of 18 years, a man in the packed public gallery lunged at him, saying he had gotten off easy. He was quickly blocked by security guards and escorted out. Morong was calm throughout this, and sat unflinchingly during his appearance today. In her victim impact statement, Tracy Duckmanton told Morong that her daughter's murder had devastated her family.
Look at me, Sane. You listen to this. You came into her life and your actions devastated my life and my family's life. Nothing will ever be the same. I have to wake up every morning knowing I will never see my beautiful daughter ever again and have to live with what you did to her. I want you to know that nothing, no sentence, no punishment will ever be enough. I hope you rot in hell.
Renee Duckmanton's badly burnt body was found in the middle of a grass fire on Main Rakaya Road in May 2016. The 22-year-old had been strangled to death by Sane Morong, who then dumped her body and set it alight. Tracy Duckmanton told the court her daughter was beautiful, goofy, bubbly and loving, but she was vulnerable due to injuries sustained when she was young.
She was a fighter from the moment she was born. Not breathing at first, it took the doctor 3 minutes to get her to take her first breath. As a result, Renee suffered damage to the brain, and this left her with cerebral palsy on the left side of the body and made her vulnerable, both physically and emotionally, as she grew up.
During his February trial, Morong didn't deny killing Ms Duckmanton, but denied responsibility for her murder, as he was mentally imbalanced. But today, Justice Manda refuted that, saying his actions were predatory and premeditated.
The combined nature of internet searches you conducted over the previous weeks, which included such topics as kidnapping, information about local prostitutes, rendering a person unconscious, killing with your bare hands, past murders of Christchurch sex workers, and necrophilia, indicate you appear to have been preoccupied with murdering a sex worker with a likely objective of fulfilling a depraved sexual fantasy.
Renee Duckmanton's father, Brent McGrath, told reporters outside the court he welcomed the sentence, although he wasn't happy with Immigration New Zealand. Morong arrived in New Zealand in 2014 on a fake passport and was about to be deported before the murder. Mr McGrath wants answers from the authorities as to why Morong was in the country.
I just want
to know that this isn't going to happen again, which probably if immigration don't get their act together, it's going to happen again. I want immigration contacting me. I'm pretty easy to find, I'm sure. I don't want a phone call. I don't want a little wee graduate. I want somebody high up in that industry to let me know how that happened. I'm pretty damn angry, actually, you know.
Renee's family say even though they are happy the court process is over, no sentence could ever bring her back. In Christchurch for Checkpoints, Call Logan Church Tēnei.
Coming up to 25 minutes past 5. We turn now to the story of Mark Middleton, who arrived in New Zealand as a 4-year-old in 1962, 56 years ago. Somehow, whilst his siblings have become New Zealanders, his children are New Zealanders, and he thought he was a New Zealander. He fell foul of Immigration New Zealand last week, being picked up from work by police, held overnight in a police cell, fired from his job after Immigration New Zealand told his bosses they could no longer employ him, and told he would have to leave the country. Well, when we spoke to Mark Middleton on Monday night, many of you were outraged by his situation. The texts came flooding in and continued flooding in all week. The opposition called for him to be able to stay, but Immigration New Zealand held firm, declining our requests for interviews to explain why. But today, the Office of the Associate Minister of Immigration, Chris Whaafoy, contacted his lawyer, who called Mark Middleton to tell him he would be able to stay. He then called us, and I asked him how he was.
Well, I'm a lot happier today. I've just got word from the Minister that that the deportation order's been lifted. I've been granted a visa. I don't have the details of everything because I'm just waiting for my lawyer, Keith Jeffries, to email me the details. But just thought I'd get in touch with you and just thank you. And things are on the up and up.
Yeah, they most certainly are. So how did you hear? When did you find out? Just a few minutes ago?
Yeah, my lawyer rang me, Keith rang me and just said, it's been lifted and he's going to send me the details. So I'm just waiting for the details to arrive.
So what does this mean? Can you go back to work?
Well, I don't know just yet. I've sent a message to my employers to tell them the good news, and I guess it's up to them to sort out. Just want to say a big thank you to them as well, because they've been very, very supportive during this time. It's not their fault. They were ordered by immigration to terminate my employment, so I've just got to. It's just a wait and see game now. I just hope that they will look kindly on their servants.
And do you have any sense at all of why the Associate Minister has done this? Obviously, he has the discretion to do it, and he's exercised that discretion, but any explanation given?
Well, I think that he's actually behaved very ethically in this case. All power to him, because he's the man who holds the power there. So I think that he's behaved really ethically. I just have a few problems with the way that I was, with the way I was treated. Really, I just think that was a bit hostile, and not very nice. It could have been. I reckon it could have been handled, a bit better than that.
And this was in terms of Immigration New Zealand and the police turning up at your work, detaining you in a cell overnight, not letting Veronica know where you were, all of that stuff initially, right?
All of that. I mean, that was all pretty stressful, John. I just felt that was pretty unnecessary. It was pretty uncalled for. I've never hidden from anybody in my life. I've always made myself available to some and sundry, whoever wants to see me and can do, and I've always said, yep, I'll come in and then I'll, it's all part of, what I am. It's just the kind of bloke I am. If you've got problems with me, just ring me up or, I'll come to a meeting anytime. Doesn't matter whether it's the police or immigration or anybody else. It's just like, you're always welcome at the door, and, if you want to talk something out, that's always the way I've handled life, really. It's just, I just found it extraordinary treatment, really. Just pretty, just bad news all around. But never let them get you down. Just got to roll with the punches and just keep coming back.
And can you tell me about the feedback and support you've been getting from people? I understand people have been stopping you on the street, have they?
Oh, it's been extraordinary. It's just amazing. Doesn't matter where I go, you know. It's just, you know, because I'm out in the patch early in the morning, about 5 in the morning. So it's just people have been all over the place, you know, on the train, whether I'm in the shop or walking down the street. It's just been fabulous, really. You know.
Yeah, it's really moving, isn't it?
You know, big thank you, NZ. You know, what can I say? Certainly done me proud, that's for sure.
Mark Middleton talking to us earlier this afternoon. The brother of an Indian woman who was refused residency after her husband drowned says she faces a life of persecution if she returns to India. Tanvi Bufsa, her husband, Heman Limbachia, drowned at Waimarama Beach in Hawke's Bay on January 4th. The couple had lived for 4 years and had applied for permanent residency, but as Mr Limbachia was the main applicant, the visa was refused following his death. Now her family are pleading with the government to allow her to stay on compassionate grounds. Here's our Hawke's Bay reporter, Anusha Bradley.
Tanvi Bhavsa's brother, Prashin Kumar, was swimming with the couple the fateful day his brother-in-law drowned. He says Heman's last act was to instruct his rescuer, Cameron McCallum, to save his wife instead.
The first words that Heman said that, hey, save Tanvi, save my wife, she's still alive.
Mrs Bhavsa returned to India to bury her husband. But Prashin Kumar says when she got there, she found she was being blamed for her husband's death.
She pretty much is considered as the person responsible for killing a 26-year-old boy of the family and only boy of the family. Apart from the very close family, that's Heman's parents and her parents and her brother, pretty much everyone else is looking her at in the same point of view that, you know, she's a husband killer, she's an inauspicious person.
She then found she was not able to return to New Zealand under her work visa, which had been granted as a dependent of her husband. And because her husband was the main applicant for their permanent residency, after his death, hers was also refused. Prashin says although Tanvi's family in India is supportive of her, she's now treated like an outcast by the community and doesn't want to stay. He's asking the government to show compassion in a case that appears to fit outside the normal rules.
But the problem is that she can't go out and face public or go around and live a normal life. You know, the time that she has been in the last 3 months, either she has spent her time at her home or Heman's home, or she goes into, even if she goes to a cafe, she has to look for a cafe which is in some remote corner because, after killing her husband, she cannot be enjoying life or even having a coffee for that matter.
Tanvi has this afternoon returned to Napier on a 3-month holiday visa and will appeal her case to the Immigration Protection Tribunal. Prashin is not Tanvi's real brother. He's a Raki brother, a cultural brother, in which he swore an oath during a religious ceremony to protect her like a blood brother for the rest of his life. He says he'll also help her appeal again to the Associate Immigration Minister Chris Farfoy for her residency to be granted on compassionate grounds. Prashin says if that doesn't work, he believes it would have been better if Tanvi had died that day in January because of the persecution she'll inevitably face.
It's very unfortunate to say that, but, you know, that is just the case.
A spokesperson for Minister Farfoy says a request for intervention won't be accepted until all other avenues have been tested. In Napier for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. Coming up, a review of bail laws. What may happen? A lucky escape for 6 people when their catamaran hit rocks near Great Barrier Island. The Warriors prepared to battle the Dragons. Yes, we're talking rugby league. We don't often do that, but the Warriors are having such a good run. We hope we're not tempting fate. We'd love your feedback. Don't forget you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint. We're on Facebook, Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Nona's got business news to end the week with next. But before it all, here is the 26.5 minutes to 6 headlines with Katrina.
The mother of Renee Duckmanton has told her murderer he has devastated her family and she hopes he rots in hell. In the High Court in Christchurch today, Saini Morong was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 18 years. Ms Duckmanton's badly burnt body was found on Main Rakai Road in May 2 years ago. Tracy Duckmanton told Morong no punishment will make up for what he did. Mark Middleton has escaped deportation. Mr Middleton, who was arrested and held in jail on the grounds of being in the country unlawfully, faced being sent back to Britain, where he was born, despite having lived in New Zealand for 56 years. He says he got the good news this morning from the Associate Immigration Minister, Chris Farfoy, who intervened in the case. A review finds officials working on the Provincial Growth Fund failed to do background checks on those involved in a proposed waste-to-energy scheme. The Regional Development Minister, Shane Jones, has frozen funding for a feasibility study after RNZ alerted him to the fact the scheme's chief executive had been referred to the Ceres Fraud Office. It says that if basic due diligence had been done, Gerard Gallagher's referral to the Ceres Fraud Office would have quickly been detected. The head of the Provincial Development Unit, Nigel Bickle, has apologised. A banking specialist across the Tasman says culture and governance is driving the sort of behaviour that leads to the resignation of the chief executive of AMP. Madeline Matera of Grant Thornton in Australia told Checkpoint the law may have to be changed to allow the jailing of banking executives for these sorts of infringements. AMP's chief executive has resigned and apologised unreservedly after it was discovered he had misled clients and the industry for decades. A young man convicted of the manslaughter of 4 people in a car crash caused by street racing has escaped a prison term. 21-year-old Dylan Cossey was today sentenced in the High Court in Hamilton to 1 year of home detention, 400 hours of community work and the loss of his licence for 7 years. The judge said Cossey was the cause of the crash, but he was not the cause of the crash, but he did play a part. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6 o'clock.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Coming up, New Zealand's mental health and addiction services and how stretched they are. But before it all, business news with Nona Peltier. We've talked about 10G Global before, haven't we?
Yes.
Nona.
That was old Turners and Growers, you remember?
Right, yeah, that's right.
That's right.
Yeah, thank you. Turners
right.
and Growers, who used to give national radio listeners the beauty and wonder of Jack Forsyth. That was before your time, wasn't it?
I'm sure it was.
Doing the fruit and veggie report on a Thursday morning, I think.
Oh, but
yes.
It's not before your
Turnips
turn.
are a good buy.
Turnips?
Yeah,
I think I can vaguely remember this. I'm not sure about it.
Anyway,
yes, well, these days that's moved on.
They're selling much of their kitty kiwi fruit operations to CHEC?
Yeah, CHEC. They are a kiwi fruit producer,
right.
Also marketer, seller. Part of the whole Zespri.
Oh, right. How much are we talking about? How much?
Well, actually, $40 million worth. Now, apparently CHEC has been wanting to buy this for a while from T&G. 5 years. And T&G thought, oh, okay, well, it's time to sell. And T&G's gone through some changes recently, too, over the last 2-3 years. It's had a change in their shareholding structure. 75% of the company is held by a German outfit. And another 20% rather, is held by Chinese investors. So it's really made a big change. And they have a lot of, of course, global company, right? So yeah, they've decided they want to take that money and they want to invest it into citrus and berries.
Still in New Zealand?
Yes, yes, absolutely, yeah. Northland and other areas, I guess. That's part of their strategy. And they think, well, they're still going to hang on to the rights that they have to their strains of kiwi fruit. They will continue to sell kiwi fruit, but the business itself, that's the packing, storage facilities, 80 hectares of kiwi fruit orchards, and $2 million of stock. That's what CHEC is getting for the price. And anyways, there you go.
So getting 80 hectares of kiwi fruit orchards.
Yeah.
That's a lot of kiwi fruit, isn't it?
That's $40 million gets you something.
Yeah. Fletcher Building shares are trading again. How did that go? Gosh, it's just fascinating, the Fletcher Building story, isn't it?
Yes. Well, they're back on the market, and of course the retail offer opens next week. But for now, started trending again. They ended up more than 2% to $6.15, and that's quite good because really the shares themselves the new shares that they issued were at a heavy discount, $4.80. So it wasn't really with all this rebalancing. The market wasn't really sure what the prices were going to come out at. They were up almost all day, and that's pretty good considering that the top 50 index was actually down 0.6%. So they moved up against the market, down 50 points to 8,323. And that's mostly because of the tech sector. There was talk out of Taiwan, I believe it's Taiwan. The chip maker was saying that basically they were going to have soft revenue sales because demand for smartphones is down, which in turn impacted the Apple shares.
This is a market looking for a lead, though, isn't it? It's just drifting around, isn't it? When it's responding to that kind of stuff.
On the other hand, the U.S. economic data is still holding up, and so the U.S. dollar is pretty strong. And the Saudis say that the glut of oil in the world has all been used up, so some things are looking up. And our dollar finished at 72.4 US cents, 93.8 Australian and 51.4 pence.
Nona Peltier, thank you very much indeed. Have a great weekend.
And you.
Thank you, Nona. New Zealand's mental health and addiction services are so stretched, even heavily addicted criminals in government-run initiatives are waiting up to 5 months for treatment. We're talking about high-risk, high-needs offenders going through the specialty alcohol and other drugs courts in Auckland, a pilot that aims to treat addiction as a health issue and keep people out of prison. So there is a real emphasis on getting people treatment, but they can't get it. After pleading guilty, acknowledging they have a problem and then being accepted into the courts program, they still face lengthy waits. In one case last year, 154 days, 5 months, just to start treatment. Our excellent reporter Zach Fleming has more.
At 37, Mark Cowan's path had forked, and it was up to him where he went. Charged with multiple offences, his choices were intensive rehab or around 3 years in prison.
Crime, drugs, prison, and release, crime, drugs, prison. That's what we call a revolving door. That was my life. Committing offences, you know, like fraud, theft, whatever it needed. I was an opportunist.
That was 5 years ago, and fortunately for Mark, it was the same year 2 special new therapeutic addiction courts opened in Auckland.
When I graduated, I was number 13. They came through the court.
Officially called the Alcohol and Other Drug Courts, AODT for short, their aim is to treat addiction as a health issue, fix the addiction and hopefully stop the offending. It's a $4.1 million evidence-based pilot backed by the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Justice and the justice system, treating criminals who need help and want help, and it's lauded by treatment providers.
Fabulous initiative.
Marvellous. Definitely helps people with a major drug addiction.
And yet, like much of New Zealand's addiction services, it's plagued by long wait times. Someone waited 154 days for treatment at the Auckland AODT court last year. That's 5 months. And at Waitakere, the maximum wait, 106 days.
People, when they're ready to get help, they can't get it immediately, and that's a problem.
That's the director of the Salvation Army's addiction services, Lynette Hudson.
Well, there's definitely not enough money going into the drug courts at the moment. There needs to be a lot more.
Johnny Dow, the director of Higher Ground, and here's Fiona Trevelyan, the CEO of Odyssey, who paused when I asked if she was surprised that even in government-endorsed initiatives, addicts face long waits.
Well, it doesn't shock me because I'm so used to it, I guess.
Those with severe addictions who need a bed in a rehab centre wait the longest. Mark says he sat in a cell for around 2 months in 2012 until he got a bed at Higher Ground.
I remember it clearly. For me, it was all these new things were coming, all these people were supporting me, but I had to stay in prison for Christmas and New Year's. And I remember them clearly, like it was yesterday, you know, because I knew that something was coming up for me.
Last year, the average wait for a bed through Auckland was 67 days, Waitakere 57 days.
The system's clogged up and we can't get more people in. That is not a good place to be, because you know that you could do something to help them, but you just don't have the resource or the capability.
Treatment through the AODT courts, intensive and complex. It can last a year and a half or even longer. Only 100 people are accepted each year, and around 2/3 relapse and fail. They exit the court and go to prison. But for those who graduate, the reward for completing treatment is big. A reduced sentence, sometimes no jail time at all.
So they put me on probation, and they cut my string, so to speak, cut the umbilical cord and said, go out into the world. But by then I already had built up my support networks.
So you went from potentially 3 years of prison to probation.
Yeah,
Pretty amazing, right?
It's crazy. It's crazy, and yeah, I did. I didn't commit crimes for 22 months. I had found myself again.
and New Zealand benefits.
They are productive members of society, they're earning, they're paying taxes. So in that way, I think the benefits are significant.
Together, Odyssey, Higher Ground and the Salvation Army provide all of the treatment for the courts, and all three say cash is ultimately the key to cutting those long wait times.
But it would probably take a lot more money, because what you'd need in Auckland is another facility.
More money, more staff, more options.
If we had more money, we could extend the services that were offered.
And all three say it is really in New Zealand's best interests to spend money to cut those wait times, because society benefits. Early indications are the courts actually save the country money, because less people end up in prison. Plus, they improve health, employment and other outcomes for offenders and their families. Mark now works for Odyssey, helping people who are where he was 5 years ago.
Yeah, I know a lot of people from prison, you know, and when they see me change, and they know what I was like in prison, you know, or what I was like on the outside, and they look and they go, look at Mark, look at him, he's a totally different person. And I suppose they look and they go, if he can do it, I'm sure as heck I can do it.
The court's funding's been set aside until June 2020, but that's static at $4.1 million a year, meaning the current 2-month average wait time for a bed could increase as costs rise and providers struggle to do more with less. The providers have a simple message.
Spend more money on residential services and treatment rather than prisons.
And so does Mark. Without the AODT court, where do you think you would be today?
There's the two options. I'll either be dead or in prison.
For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
Nick Monroe, the cameraman and editor of Zach's story, we asked the Ministry of Justice about the 2-month average wait for treatment. It said some people face longer waits because of bail conditions, like needing a bed in a rehab or a suitable address, but it wouldn't answer whether 2 months is acceptable. That story, which was shot by Nick and reported by Zach, is an example of the kind of work we're doing, the multimedia work we're doing. So you can watch that or listen to it. It also goes up on Facebook, and we're finding a whole new audience of Facebook people who are non-traditional Radio New Zealand listeners, and they're getting tens of thousands of views in some cases. So if you want to see that material, which was in fact a visual story, it is available on Checkpoint's Facebook page. Lots of feedback coming in tonight on the banking inquiry in Australia. People very exercised by this, as they are across the Tasman increasingly. Having opposed it in many cases, they're really getting on board. Hi John, fascinating that big banks are finally getting it in the neck. Wonder how the New Zealand banking doctors, spin doctors will handle this. We've been talking to the FMA, we're talking to people about this, and we're going to look at what we're learning in Australia and whether it applies in New Zealand. That's Steve Wheeler. Thanks, Steve. John, that's only the tip of the iceberg. Read big banks. Many already know of the theft and deception that's been going on for years, says Maureen Dunn from Levin and Horowhenua, of course. I arrived in New Zealand. This is Mark Middleton, being saved from deportation by Chris Whaafoy this afternoon. I arrived in New Zealand as a 4-year-old too in 1957. It wasn't until returning from our honeymoon in Fiji in 1979 did I realise I could not get back into New Zealand, as I was on a British passport and did not have a returning to New Zealand permit. It was a great motivation to get New Zealand citizenship, I tell you, which my new wife made me do pronto. But I bet this could happen to lots of people, says Rob. Clearly, Immigration New Zealand needs to be more compassionate. I'm appalled by this behaviour, says Lou. And Frank, we always love hearing from you, Frank. Thank you. Says, interesting that Mark Middleton was going to be thrown out after 56 years, but US billionaire Peter Thiel got citizenship after a week. Something stinks. It is 12 minutes to 6. Let's go to Christchurch. The nurses' organisation says a serious assault in Hagley Park in the city last night shows hospital staff are still at risk from a lack of secure parking. The student nurse was attacked as she walked to her car after finishing a shift at Christchurch Hospital. Last year, the Canterbury District Health Board said it was working to provide more secure parking after a nurse was grabbed by a masked man near the park who was believed to be holding a gun. A nurses' organisation spokesperson, Christine Watson, says it's been raising the issue of parking with the DHB for years. While some improvements have been made, more needs to be done.
It's really disappointing to hear that, we've had another assault on a member of staff leaving Christchurch Hospital, at night. And obviously we're really disturbed and upset set for the nurse. Our members have been concerned for quite a while in terms of the security for them, and one of the main concerns is around just being able to have enough secure parking. People don't feel safe walking to and from their cars in the dark around Hagley Park, particularly around that area where there is a lot of parking down Ricketton Ave, Hagley Ave. It doesn't feel safe for people going to and from their cars in the dark. If we had more secure parking available at the hospital, then not just nurses, but other health workers who are down there would be able to park, and the students should be included in that. They're working, a lot of them are working in the same shifts as part of their training. They're working afternoon shifts, they're finishing late at night. They need to have access to the same security measures and the same ability to have safe and secure parking as other people down there.
It's Kristen Watson from the New Zealand Nursing Organisation. We would love to hear from you if you are a nurse at any of our hospitals in New Zealand and you find getting from work late at night or very early in the morning in the dark to your car or whatever transport you have a bit of a scary experience. Do text us 2101. Let's move on now to a subject that was being discussed on Morning Report this morning. This is Justice Minister Andrew Little, and his signalling that bail laws may be in for a shake-up, with the prison population ballooning because of the number of offenders behind bars on remand. The latest statistics from corrections show almost 3,000 offenders are being remanded in prison as their cases move through the courts. That's almost twice as many as September 2013, so not even 5 years ago, when the previous government's bail reforms came into effect. They now make up almost 30% of the prison population, that's remand prisoners. Timothy Brown has this report.
I just think that they really need to review this carefully, and my message to Andrew Little would be that he has the chance to actually make himself to be remembered for doing the right thing, and if he does it properly, he will be respected for that.
That's the voice of Tracy Marceau, who is understandably concerned about talk of softening the bail laws. Her 18-year-old daughter, Christy, was killed by Akshay Chand in November 2011 after he was granted bail to a home just 300 metres from Christy's, despite being before the courts for her kidnap and assault. Chand was later acquitted of the murder on grounds of insanity, and Christie's death was the catalyst for the stricter bail laws, which came into effect 2 years later. Tracy Marceau campaigned at the time for an even stronger regime, and she says backtracking on the previous government's changes will put people at risk.
I do think it carries a risk. I mean, and as we know, even with the bail laws as they stand now, they're still slipping through the cracks, and there's still absconders on bail and still ones that are committing violent crimes.
She says any reform of the justice system should look at the courts.
They really need to look at sorting out the delays at court for the remand, so the remand periods wouldn't be so long. Because this puts so much stress on not only the victims, but, you know, it probably does cause unnecessary duress to the offenders.
Mrs Marceau says Andrew Little's taken up her request that they meet. She says she'll canvass the bail laws and wider justice reform. Law professor Mark Hennigan from the University of Otago says bail laws aren't working.
I hear that anecdotally from judges and lawyers. They really feel that we've probably gone too far. So I think it's a really good thing to relook at the bail laws.
Mark Hennigan says any relaxing of the laws will create some risk, but it is impossible to predict where offending will occur, and the public needs to remember those on remand are yet to be convicted of any crime.
There are thousands of people every day out in the streets who are on bail, who are maybe coming up, who don't do anything wrong. So that's a reality, and that's happening all the time. If you just overemphasise safety, as I said, you put everyone on remand, and that would become ridiculous and go against the general principle of innocent until proven guilty.
But Sensible Sentencing Trust spokesman Scott Guthrie says they'll vehemently oppose any softening of the bail laws.
We've had so many people that have offended in this country and caused horrific mayhem to families and to members of our society while they're on bail. And the more that we relax the bail laws, the more that we're going to see that kind of offending. It's not acceptable, and it just can't be had.
The Justice Minister has not indicated what a changed bail regime will look like, but the matter will be discussed in August at a criminal justice summit. For Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
This is a fascinating issue. We'd love your feedback on it. Do text us 2101. It's 6 minutes to 6. Checkpoint doesn't cover much NRL Rugby League. By and large, in simple terms, we're light on sports when there's a big victory to report on. The Warriors haven't provided many of those in recent seasons, to put it politely. But this season has been different. So different, we're about to run a story on the Warriors. Tonight, the Auckland-based league franchise play the St George Illawarra Dragons in Auckland. And believe it or not, as unlikely as it seems, it's a top-of-the-table clash, or very near to. Now, a declaration of interest here. Shannon Haunui-Thompson, our reporter, is a huge Warriors fan. She never stopped believing in it, even when it was a religious act of faith. There would have been games when Shannon, about 40 people were the only ones there. Still, she plays it pretty straight in the story, beginning with some major injuries to the home team.
A huge setback for the Warriors, with star halfback Shaun Johnson and Solomone Kata both ruled out of tonight's game with injury. The team's in third place, but their early winning streak came to a sudden halt last week when they lost to the Brisbane Broncos. Warriors coach Steve Kearney says it'll take a team effort for them to win tonight.
Got a big challenge ahead of us, top of the table team who are playing a great style of footy, and we need to be all on board to make sure we make it a fantastic contest.
Kearney acknowledges his team will be up against it with the Dragons' strong attacking ability.
I think they're putting a real pressure on the opposition with their attack, and then obviously you've got to defend well, and they're doing that very well also. But I just think the style of attack, the way they're attacking teams, is certainly putting some real pressure on them.
The St George Illawarra Dragons have history and form on their side. Heading into tonight's game, they're the only unbeaten side after 6 rounds. St George have won 13 of their past 14 matches against the Warriors, and they're the NRL's most prolific attacking team with an average of almost 33 points per game. However, Dragons coach Paul McGregor says they're well aware of the Warriors' attacking talents, plus their home advantage.
They are talented, with my spine. Very impressed with how they're playing. Each week they're going to training to put some variation in what they're doing. They're executing well when they go out there under pressure, so it's just about maintaining that and continuing it.
Warriors prop Adam Blair says the only way they'll win is by playing as a team.
Come out here committed as a group, not individually but collectively as a group, and turn up with the attitude that we're going to get stuck into this group and do it together as a forward pack. If we don't turn up, they'll put a scoreline on us.
It's unknown when Shaun Johnson will be match fit and return to play. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei ko Shannon Haunui-Thompson, aho.
And that game is in Auckland tonight. 2 young children and 4 adults on a 30-foot catamaran had to be winched to safety after their boat hit rocks while on its way to Great Barrier Island early this morning. All 6 passengers escaped with minor injuries. One of the paramedics reveals what a lucky escape they had. John Boynton with the story.
St John paramedic Andrew Ferguson was on one of 2 rescue helicopters which pulled the 6 passengers to safety from a rocky outcrop in the Mokohino Islands, 21 kilometres northwest of Great Barrier Island. Andrew Ferguson says the early morning rescue was made difficult by poor light and the island's rocky terrain.
The big challenge being is that there were some tall rocks they're referred to as the pinnacles on the area of the Mokohino, which jut vertically out, which obviously make life a little bit trickier for the helicopter to be able to get in nice and close. There's quite a lot of large boulders in and around and physical obstructions there.
The yacht was quickly filling with water when the 6 people escaped on an inflatable raft. Luckily, weather conditions were calm.
It was relatively clear skies. There wasn't a lot of swell or anything happening out there, and they were all sort of huddled together in on the rocks.
Andrew Ferguson says it was a team effort.
The Westpac helicopter managed to get an initial medic down and retrieve a couple of the people off the rocks from the vessel. And then I was lowered down by winch onto the rocks and were able to retrieve the remaining persons back up into our aircraft.
Emergency services were alerted at 5 o'clock and the Westpac rescue helicopter and the Northland rescue helicopter were dispatched immediately, along with the Ports of Auckland pilot vessel Wakatere. Auckland Police Maritime Unit Sergeant Gary Larson says the yacht was on its way to Great Barrier Island from Whangaparaoa when it got into trouble.
Police Northcoms received a 111 call from a distressed person.
stating they'd run up on rocks on the Mokihinau. It's northwest of Great Barrier Island, quite a fair way out. So if you're on a boat travelling from Auckland, it'd take a couple of hours to get out there at least.
Mr Larson says the passengers suffered minor injuries and were taken to Whangarei Hospital.
From the information we've got, they were distressed. Obviously a couple of young children involved, but apparently they're doing well now.
The yacht is now completely submerged with only the mast visible. The police are investigating to find the cause of the incident. Ko John Boynton, Aho.
It's about 40 seconds before the News at 6. Katrina Batten has just arrived with the latest after the News at 6. This terrible crash near Thames last night. The Kopu Bridge, it is a one-lane bridge not far from the settlement of Thames, and devastating. Emergency services, the people, the first responders who were there say it was just a terrible thing to attend. A married couple in their 60s from the small settlement of Turua among the 3 people killed in the crash. We'll have more on that after the News at 6. And the latest on a real changing of the guard in Cuba. It's coming up to the Friday Night Pips.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten, Aho. A judge has told the man who murdered Christchurch sex worker Renee Duckmanton the killing was premeditated and predatory. In the High Court in Christchurch today, Saini Marong was sentenced to life in prison for the murder. Ms Duckmanton's badly burnt body was found on Main Rakai Road in May 2 years ago. Marong had claimed he killed her while mentally imbalanced, but Justice Manders said today there was no evidence of that.
The combined nature of internet searches you conducted over the previous weeks, which included such topics as kidnapping, information about local prostitutes, rendering a person unconscious, killing with your bare hands, past murders of Christchurch sex workers, and necrophilia, indicate you appear to have been preoccupied with murdering a sex worker with a likely objective of fulfilling a depraved sexual fantasy.
Justice Manders set a minimum non-parole period of 18 years. A review has found government officials failed to do any due diligence whatsoever on the people behind a proposed waste-to-energy scheme that was to be given hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxpayer money. Funding for a feasibility study was frozen by the Regional Development Minister Shane Jones after RNZ alerted him to the fact the scheme's chief executive had been referred to the Serious Fraud Office. Political reporter Benedict Collins has more.
The internal review has found officials working on the Provincial Growth Fund failed to do background checks on those involved in Renew Energy. It says that if basic due diligence had been done, Gerard Gallagher's referral to the SFO would have been quickly detected. The head of the Provincial Development Unit, Nigel Bickle, has apologised. He says the public rightly expects government agencies to run a robust process before awarding contracts, and in this case, it didn't happen. From Parliament, Benedict Collins.
The stepfather of Lower Hutt schoolgirl Carla Cardno, who was raped and murdered by Paul Daly in 1989, has been reprieved from deportation. Mark Middleton faced being sent back to Britain, where he was born, despite having lived in New Zealand for 56 years. Last week, he was arrested and held in jail on the grounds of being in the country unlawfully. Immigration officials said he was only issued with a 30-day visitor visa after returning from holiday in Fiji in 1986 and had not applied for citizenship then or at any time since. Mr Middleton says he got the good news this morning from the Associate Immigration Minister Chris Farfoy, who intervened in the case and overruled Immigration New Zealand. A law firm is offering to make compensation bid on behalf of residents affected by toxic firefighting foam. The foam is no longer being used at airports and Defence Force air bases, but is thought to have contaminated soil and in some cases groundwater around the country. The law firm Shine is taking a case for compensation on behalf of 450 people in Queensland who say they're out of pocket because of their land being contaminated. It now wants to find New Zealanders interested in taking a similar case here. The United States says it has credible information Russia and Syria are trying to sanitise the site of this month's suspected chemical weapons attack. The ABC's Peter Simpson reports.
The State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert says international inspectors also continue to be denied access to the town of Douma, where the alleged attack took place. She says information indicates that Russian officials are working with the Syrian government to remove incriminating evidence of chemical weapons used. Western countries say scores of people were gassed to death in the attack, accusations denied by Russia and Syria. Meanwhile, the Syrian government says the evacuation of the Ghouta region has been completed with up to 5,000 people, fighters and their families, leaving the town of Al-Dumair under a deal reached with Damascus.
Peter Simpson with that report. An 83-year-old man convicted of a deadly bombing spree nearly 30 years ago has been executed in the American state of Alabama. Walter Moody, who died by lethal injection, is the oldest known person put to death in the modern era of US capital punishment. He had been convicted of mailing a bomb in 1989 that killed a circuit court judge and another that killed a Georgia civil rights lawyer. It was the 8th execution this year in the United States. The police in Whanganui are investigating how a critically injured man came to be lying in a street in the early hours of this morning. The man was found unconscious in Tinaro Street, Whanganui East, at 3 o'clock. He was taken to Wellington Hospital, where he's being treated for his injuries. Investigators want to hear from anyone who saw or heard anything out of the ordinary in the area. It's 6:05. Sport with a huge injury toll. It'll be a very much reshuffled Blues lineup for tonight's Super Rugby match against the Highlanders at Eden Park. 18 players are unavailable as the home team chase just their 3rd win of the season. The Highlanders are coming off a big win over the Brumbies, but coach Aaron Major says they can't get distracted by being overwhelming favourites.
As soon as you start buying into that sort of chat, you take your eye off the ball, don't you, and lose focus on your own process. So for us, it's business as usual. We want to make sure we focus on our own game. We'll get that right, and I'm sure if we do that, then we'll be competitive and give ourselves a good chance.
Aaron Major. The match kicks off at 25-8. The former coach of Lydia Ko says the New Zealand golfer is a shadow of her former self on the court. Ko has fallen from 1st to 16th in the world rankings in the past 18 months. David Ledbetter coached her for 3 years until they parted ways a year and a half ago. He says comments by leading player Christy Kerr that Ko seems lost with her game reflects what he sees.
I've heard that from several players, really, who played with her and just say she's just not the same Lydia, who had this confidence about her. And now it's like, she's almost timid in the way she's playing.
David Ledbetter. Ko was tied for 15th after the opening round of the latest LPGA Tour event. And in Rugby League, the Warriors play unbeaten St George Illawarra at Auckland's Mount Smart Stadium tonight with kick-off at 8. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, rock star economist Jeffrey Sachs famously declared that he could envisage the end of poverty. Now it's the beginning of sustainable development. Francis Wade explains what turned Buddhists to extreme violence in Myanmar. And Eileen Miles writes about a dog called Rosie, among many other things. Join me, Ken Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 here on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. John has come in, he's very quiet. Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel and the Central High Country. Cloudy periods and a few showers, some heavy and thundery tomorrow afternoon from Waikato to Taranaki. For the remainder of the North Island, mostly fine, but the odd shower about Bay of Plenty, the Tararua District and Kapiti. Westerly gales for Wairarapa and Hawke's Bay. For Nelson and Marlborough, mostly fine. A shower or two possible about the Sounds today and about the Kaikoura coast tomorrow evening. For Canterbury, mostly fine with westerly gales about the high country. However, a few showers spreading north tomorrow, possibly heavy with thunderstorms about the coast. Bulla to Fiordland, showers some heavy, easing tomorrow evening. Otago and Southland, showers about Southland, spreading elsewhere this evening, westerly gales in exposed places. And the Chatham Islands fine spells today and a few showers tomorrow. It's coming up to 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten.
Thank you, John Campbell.
Have a lovely weekend.
You too. Go the Warriors.
Yeah, go the Warriors. This is a heartbreaking story, particularly in these small communities. A married couple in their 60s from the small settlement of Turua are among the 3 people killed in an horrific crash near Thames. A 20-year-old man also died, and his father was left with serious injuries in last night's crash at the Kopu Bridge. Emergency services have described the scene as catastrophic. Tom Furley reports.
Ian and Anne Fielder were keen members of the Thames Golf Club. A woman from the club says it has been left absolutely gutted, and many are in mourning. The two utes had been driving towards each other when the crash happened. The chief officer of the Thames Fire Brigade, Greg Randall, says when they arrived at the scene, people were trapped in the cars.
Both vehicles, people were heavily trapped. One crew from Thames worked on one vehicle and one crew from Ngatea worked on the other vehicle. We worked with the paramedics from St John's as it unfolded. Some were probably deceased earlier on, and then that's just the way that it unfolded. And one person was extricated and put in the rescue helicopter and flown.
Driving the other car was 20-year-old Hayden David Clark from Drury, who died at the scene. The police say he was driving a stolen car and appears to have crossed the centre lines before colliding with the Fielder's car. His passenger was his 54-year-old father, who was flown to Middlemore Hospital with serious injuries. The Auckland Westpac Rescue Helicopter's intensive care paramedic, Ross Aitken, says in his 18 years of work in this field, the crash was one of the worst he's attended.
I'd describe the damage to both cars as catastrophic. It was obviously a very busy scene with ambulances, fire trucks and obviously the crashed cars themselves. They were extensively damaged. It was quite hard to tell quite what they were.
Mr Aitken says crashes like this are tragic for all involved.
The reality of the job, it's interesting to think some things affect you and some things don't. And I think that, for us, we're pretty lucky. We sort of turn up and get given a patient and fly off with them. And I think sometimes that's hardest on the ambulance crews that are getting there first and the police that, have to deal with the relatives.
The Mayor of the Thames Coromandel District, Sandra Gowdy, could see the scene from her home.
We actually thought it was an armed offenders call out or something because there were so many police cars going in so many directions, and so it's heartbreaking to know how tragic the situation actually was.
Sandra Gowdy says the stretch of road is well constructed and says a report will have to detail what went wrong.
I do know that the stretch of road where the incident occurred is a good piece of roading infrastructure, and it's wide, it's sound. There would be no sort of real reason for why it would occur.
Ms Gowdy says with two of the victims being local people, the whole community will be affected. 125 people have died on the roads since the start of this year, 18 more than this time last year. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Tom Furley tēnei.
11 minutes past 6. Government officials failed to do any background checks on the directors of a company they were going to hand over hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars to. A new report has found that officials working on the Provincial Growth Fund fell well short of the mark by not doing any due diligence on Renew Energy, which was to receive $350,000 for a feasibility study for a waste-to-energy scheme on the West Coast. The Regional Development Minister, Shane Jones, put the project on ice after RNZ informed him the company's chief executive had been referred to the Serious Fraud Office. The head of the Provincial Development Unit, Nigel Bickle, told political reporter Benedict Collins the public deserves an apology.
The key finding of the internal review is that the processes, particularly around due diligence, fell short of what would be expected, and as a result we let both senior public servants that made the decisions and ministers that announced them down and fell short of the mark.
Looks like you guys didn't do any due diligence on the people behind Renew Energy whatsoever.
No, we didn't. And whilst I can say that, the processes that have been in place under the regional program had always been to do the due diligence as part of finalising contract arrangements, given that this was for the launch of, the government's new Provincial Growth Fund, and we knew they were being announced, the prudent thing that both ministers and senior officials that were making the decision to approve the funding should have been able to rely on that we'd done due diligence, and we hadn't.
You've apologised to the Minister for not getting it right. Do you think you should be apologising to the public too?
Absolutely. The thing that, I'm very conscious of, and I know ministers are, is that we are talking about $3 billion of taxpayers' money over the next 3 years for the Provincial Growth Fund, and it is incumbent on us to ensure that the processes ensure the appropriate level of probity and prudence in how taxpayers' money is being used.
Have the officials who prepared these reports and didn't do the due diligence, have they been reprimanded or disciplined?
Yeah, I'm not going to make it a major employment investigation, but I've certainly sat down with the team and stressed the expectations that we have, and clearly we've got some different processes that are in place now that are going to be followed.
That is the head of the Provincial Development Unit, Nigel Bickle, talking to our political reporter, Benedict Collins. 13.5 minutes past 6. A young man has escaped jail time for his part in the deaths of 4 people killed when their car crashed while street racing near Hamilton. 21-year-old Dylan Cossey was today sentenced in the High Court in Hamilton to 1 year of home detention, 400 hours of community work and disqualification from driving for 7 years. He was found guilty at a trial in February of 4 counts of manslaughter, 1 of racing and 1 of failing to stop to ascertain injuries. Cossey was racing with another car on State Highway 3 in June 2016 when that car passed his and then lost control, ploughing into a van. Our Waikato reporter Andrew McRae has been in court.
The 4 people who died in the crash were aged 19, 20, 24 and the driver Lance Robinson, who was 28. Cossey had momentarily slowed down as Mr Robinson sped past him and seconds later lost control. In a victim impact statement, the mother of Hannah Strickett-Craze, Erica Strickett-Fraser, said her sense of loss is unbearable.
It's a battle every day to drive past that crash site on my way to work and on the way home.
She told Cossey that he should look at the sentence as an opportunity to move forward in a positive direction.
And to do something wonderful with your lives, which is what Hannah would have done. You have a chance to live a very full and happy life. Please don't waste it. Life is precious.
Amber De Silva, the aunt of Paul De Silva, spoke directly to Cossey.
You chose to drive away from that accident, and I cannot express how angry I am that you left those kids.
Crown Prosecutor Duncan McWilliam wanted a starting point in sentencing of between 8 and 9 years and says culpability for what happened must be shared between both Lance Robinson and Cossey.
It's suggested that it was a duration of driving of around 9 minutes, but the Crown simply says that was ample time for the defendant to disengage from this pattern of driving. It was ample time for this defendant to slow down to the speed limit.
Defence lawyer Philip Morgan QC accepted there was equal blame for the racing, but said blame for the deaths of the 4 people did not mainly rest with his client.
The jury's verdict does not establish is that Mr Cossey's driving was the sole cause, and what the verdict of the jury does not establish is that the driving of Mr Cossey was the primary cause.
Mr Morgan thought a starting point of 3 years was more appropriate. Justice Hinton says while Cossey was racing, he wasn't the driver who lost control.
There was no additional action by you which caused the driver of the other car to lose control, such as aggressive driving or a dangerous passing manoeuvre. You were in your lane and you decelerated, albeit only immediately prior to the accident.
Justice Hinton says Cossey, while remorseful, believed the accident was not his fault.
The fatal flaw in your thinking is it ignores the effect your racing and your bad driving had on Mr Robinson's driving. You both played a part in the tragic deaths and the injuries.
Speaking outside the court, Amber De Silva wasn't happy with the sentence.
Home detention, they still have the luxuries of Sky TV, Netflix,
good food,
Uber Eats.
Yep.
They've got they've got the luxury of having a hot shower,
parents running around
privately. They've got all those luxuries of being with their parents and having that relationship with their family, having their family over.
They can still have relationships.
What was the point?
A person in the car with Cossey, 20-year-old Stephen Jones, had his sentencing on racing, failing to stop and trying to pervert the course of justice adjourned today to allow for a further probation report. In Hamilton for Checkpoint, Ko Andrew McRae.
Lots of people texting in to tell me that the Kopu Bridge is a 2-lane bridge now. The old one was 1 lane. My apologies, it's a while since I've been over the Kopu Bridge, 2 lanes. And I was a student nurse at Christchurch Hospital 40 years ago. We were told to ask an orderly to accompany us to our car after an evening shift. It seems staff safety still not addressed all these years later. 40 years ago, student nurse. Thank you for your texts and thank you for listening. Let's go back to Australia. We reported on this earlier with an absolutely fascinating interview. This is a report this is the Royal Commission into Misconduct in Banks and Financial Institutions. It's claimed its first very high-profile scalp. Craig Mellor, Chief Executive of AMP, has quit after the country's largest wealth manager admitted it had lied to the corporate watchdog ASIC on as many as 20 occasions and charged customers for services they didn't receive. Shocking details have emerged from the inquiry this week. That's no overstatement either, including evidence presented by lawyers that the country's largest bank, Commonwealth Bank of Australia, knowingly charged dead clients fees for years. Some of the stuff looks rapacious and cynical. In Canberra, the Treasurer Scott Morrison has been dodging criticism that the Turnbull government fought tooth and nail late last year to prevent this Royal Commission from going ahead. Everyone is now saying it's a good thing. The ABC's Catherine Gregory reports.
Craig Mellor will step down immediately after AMP admitted to misleading the corporate regulator ASIC on as many as 20 occasions. Mike Wilkins, a former CEO of the insurer IAG, will act in the role until a replacement is found. AMP will also conduct a review into its regulatory reporting and governance. And it seems Craig Mellor might not be the only scalp of the Royal Commission. Scott Morrison has flagged there'll possibly be more fallout from the probe.
The boards of these organisations are the custodians, really, of the governance. And I'm sure that will have plenty of attention as the Commission carries on its important work. But equally, ASIC has a job to do, and I have no doubt that as this process unfolds, there will be criticisms levelled there at the past practices of ASIC.
The Treasurer and the Financial Services Minister, Kelly O'Dwyer, both point out that ASIC and its capabilities needs to be improved. They say that's why the government is aiming to reform the regulator, particularly after a recent review. This is part of Kelly O'Dwyer's suite of measures hitting the banking and financial services sector. She's announced bigger penalties for corporate misconduct to include fines exceeding $200 million for corporations, almost $1 million for individuals, and up to 10 years jail time. But the government says these changes are not a hasty response to the findings from the Royal Commission. It's from the financial system inquiry that started in 2016. Scott Morrison also cautions the public to realise that the misconduct reflects a cultural issue in the sector, not its strength.
In fact, Australia's banking and financial system is one of the strongest in the world, and that's something I think Australians can have great confidence in. What they are really questioning, and I think rightly, goes to issues of behaviour and culture, which are things which we as a government have been seeking to address now for some years. And what we're announcing today is a further action that we've been taking to address that.
And this is the message the Coalition has been repeating this week, that it's been constantly working on stamping out any misconduct. It comes in response to criticism, particularly from Labor, to the Turnbull government's initial opposition to have the Royal Commission.
Catherine Gregory in Canberra getting a lot of texts and emails suggesting you were asking what is the situation given that many of these Australian banks are parents to New Zealand's major banks. We will look at the situation in New Zealand, different rules, regulations and laws governing banking here, but we will look at it. A pilot program at a South Auckland prison is being credited with helping Māori men reconnect with their culture and stamping out gang rivalries and jail tensions in the process. And there are plans to extend the program, which sees inmates come together for a 2-hour te reo Māori lesson once a week, every week. Te Mana Kotahi reporter, no matter who you are, you go to the lesson. Te Mana Kotahi reporter John Boynton and our wonderful cameraman Nick Monroe went out to find out how prisoners are finding common ground learning te reo Māori.
Inside Te Whare Manaki at the Auckland South Correctional Facility in Wiri, a te reo Māori class is in session.
Read the sentence, ko reo, te karahipi aho. So what is that? What is...
And as one of the prisoners explains, this class is strictly a no-gang zone at the jail, which is home to more than 900 inmates.
We leave all our colours out the door. You know, we don't bring it in the hui or the wānanga we're having. We just leave it all out there. And I suppose outside there too, you know, outside the door, there's still a lot of respect shown amongst everyone.
Since September, 7 students have taken a pilot te reo Māori program based on Māori broadcaster Scotty Morrison's book, Māori Made Easy. The prisoners have different gang affiliations, but when they enter the wharenui and open their Māori dictionaries, those differences are put aside.
We all found the need to want to learn something, and it doesn't even cross our minds, you know, there's rivalry in amongst us. We're just trying to learn together. You know, we're at the same level. So that'll be the best part about it, that we're here to learn our own culture, our own reo a kaya tarangatira, ne e kōrero, chiefly language.
Ing, if we put ing on the end, that's a suffix, looking, walking.
His
talking,
teacher,
sleeping.
Anne Gervin, is a volunteer from the prison reform group, the Howard League. She says it's taken time for the class to work together.
It was quite a task to work so that they were all working together. And right from the start, I said I was not the teacher, I was not the tutor. It was a collaborative learning environment where we were all students and all learning together.
Some students are fluent Te Reo Māori speakers, while others are still at the beginning of their journey. However, Anne Gervin has been able to see how much they've improved in the last 7 months.
I'm so proud of what they've done. They have worked really hard. And 2 hours is quite a long time when you are having to focus quite carefully on language and structure and vocabulary.
Prison Director Mike Ingalls says the Te Reo program shows prisoners can look beyond their gang connections.
For me, everything we do in prison is based on respect and respecting each other. The other important thing is to make sure we have a zero tolerance approach to violence in any form. And for me, the men coming together, whether it's in their house block or whether it's on the Te Reo programme, it's about treating each other with respect, making sure when you come into the whare, you come into the whare with respect, you make sure you treat each other the same as we expect of our families in the community.
And he can see how the program will benefit inmates.
And whether that's back to iwi, hapu or back into their whānau, the strategies or the programmes or the interventions that they've taken part in here continue with them into the community to make sure there's less victims of crime and to make sure that they don't come back into custody.
Currently, Māori men make up 45% of the prison population in New Zealand. Anne Gervin says she hopes her current crop of students will be able to teach the other prisoners keen to do the class in the future.
Looking to run another course in May, and they've all said they would like to join it, so that sort of is a bit heartening that they trust that we will be able to do something else.
And once this prisoner walks out from life behind bars, he wants to take back what he's learnt to his whānau and continue his path to recovery.
Because I don't think our parents ever wanted us to see the inside of these places, but you just try and produce a better future for your children and yourself, your partner.
The 7 prisoners taking reo lessons will graduate next month at a ceremony in front of their loved ones. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko John Boynton aho.
Lovely story, John and Nick. It's almost us for the week, but just before we go tonight, a story came in from CNN which we really like. It's a little bit mean, but one of the world's most famous magicians has been forced to reveal the secret of his magic. The American illusionist David Copperfield has had to outline how one of his signature tricks is done to a Las Vegas courtroom. He's being sued by a man who claims he was injured while participating in one of Copperfield's performances in 2013. So we just thought we'd all like to know what he does. CNN's Omar Jimenez has the details.
It's called the Vanishing Crowd or Lucky 13 illusion. David Copperfield picks participants at random by throwing 13 balls into the audience. The volunteers are placed in a cage that hovers over the stage and, abracadabra, they disappear and then reappear in the back of the room. Well, the cat's out of the bag.
Once these lights come on, they are outside of the physical prop. Right. Once a group of lights comes on.
Now, during this time period, they're en route, let's say, right? Correct. They're en route to appear in the back of the theater.
Yes.
That's executive producer Chris Kenner explaining how the magic trick works.
And then this is a little hallway covered at the top. They would come through and then step down the stairs. That would be the first exit out of the...
In reality, the participants are led through back passageways in the hotel, through a kitchen at a quick speed so they can pop up and surprise the audience. A man named Gavin Cox took part in the trick in 2013 and says he tripped backstage and fell into a dark construction zone. He claims to have permanent brain damage. A year after the incident, Cox filed suit against Copperfield, the MGM Grand Hotel, and 3 other companies connected to the show. Copperfield told the court the night Cox participated in the trick, he ran the course with no problems.
You said that if there was an obstacle or a problem in the way,
and I didn't deal with it. If I didn't do anything about it, and during my runaround, I took a pass before, if I saw it and didn't deal with it, it would be my fault for sure.
Here, there's a person standing right here. Right.
Copperfield's executive producer says he never got the impression Cox was seriously injured.
He said that a gentleman slipped during the trick and fell. At the trick, he spoke to him and asked him if he was okay. He said yes. Mr. Cox said yes.
Copperfield has been performing the illusion in his showcase for 10 years. It's unclear if it will remain part of his show.
CNN being spoil sports, ending Checkpoint for the week. On behalf of Pip Keane, Catherine Wallbridge, Bridget Burke, Michelle Cook, Zach Fleming, Kelvin Samuel, Blake Paul and Nick Monroe, thank you so much for being with us. Checkpoint is a production of RNZ News. We are delighted to have your company. Have a wonderful weekend and we will be back on Monday at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A judge disputes the claim of Renee Dugmanton's murderer that he was unbalanced, saying the killing was premeditated and predatory. A review of a proposed waste-to-energy scheme has found government officials failed to do any due diligence whatsoever. Mark Middleton sidesteps deportation and gets to stay in the country where he spent almost all his 60 years. And the US believes Russia and Syria are trying to sanitise the site of this month's suspected chemical weapons attack. Our next news and weather is at 7.
This week, Country Life's in Central Otago with rabbiters who use tried and true methods to get rid of the pests.
This is a ferret. This is Crank. He smashes the rabbits. He's a cool wee ferret.
If you look up there, Carol, there's 2 rabbits on that face directly in front of my rifle, but you can't see them, can you? I can see them as warm glowing dots.